What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show. You know what time it is. Week 10 matchups breakdown. Thursday afternoon, well, late morning, going well into the afternoon. I'm Dave Loughran. With me, as always, Matt Savoca. Follow the man on Twitter at Draftaholic. Myself at Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. Just go ahead, do that right now, real quick. If you're not using Twitter for sports, you're doing it wrong. Now, look, if you're using it for politics, God help you. My God, what a
wow! You took the turn into that one. 4 seconds in.
Yeah,
wow.
What I'm saying is, God help you. It is an absolute cesspool, and I get sucked down that rabbit hole way more often than I should be, Matt. But for sports, if you can kind of compartmentalize things, well, it's pretty great.
Hey, there are some bad sports takes on there too. At Old Takes Exposed, that's some free advertising for him. There's some really cool takes there too. But yeah, Twitter, it's great.
I interviewed him on Sirius once, and he's a very cool guy. You would think he would just be, full of hostility and rage, trying to out everyone for their bad takes. But you know what? He was like the most rational, reasonable guy that I've talked to. So yeah,
that's cool.
It's a great channel, though, or it's a great handle. But look, ultimately, there's some bad sports takes, no doubt. But we generally stay away from people threatening to kill each other when we're talking about sports. There is definitely a line to be drawn there, Matt, and there's no way that one is comparable to the other. I'm telling you, just take a peek into the political neck of the woods. You'll never want to go back. Promise you. I always go back, though.
I had a parent who was like, I think I want to get into Twitter. And I was like, just stay away.
Yes.
Just stay off. No,
yeah, unless it's for sports. Unless
it's for sports. That's right. I will hook that parent up with sports Twitter the minute they ask.
That's right. Anyway, we're happy to have you guys with us. You know how it goes. If you haven't subscribed yet, help us get to 50K. We're almost there. Well, we're like 10 or 9,000 away, but we cruise past 40K. We're trying to bang out that 50K mark by the end of the year. We got a month and a half or so to make it happen. And the only reason we can do that is because of you guys. The only reason we keep being able to put out free content like this is because of you. So we love you, all of you that tune in once a week, every single day, once in a while, doesn't matter. We appreciate your support. So hit that subscribe. And of course, that thumbs up button, like the video if you haven't done so yet. All right, Matt, 11 games. You ready to dive into it?
Let's go. Let's dive in. Can't wait.
All right, baby. Let's make it happen. Washington and Detroit starting off with a barn burner here. The Washington football team getting 3.5 points on the road against Detroit, 46.5 point total. I do think there's actually a decent amount to talk about with Washington because we saw that pretty ugly injury for Kyle Allen. He's going to be out for the remainder of the year. Enter Alex Smith. Imagine having to be Alex Smith watching that happen, knowing that you almost died because of an injury, a lower body injury, coming in. I know I know that his yards per attempt is low, but the one thing that stood out to me, and I'm going to turn this over to you, let you run with it, was Jerick McKinnon has been targeted on 35% of Alex Smith's pass attempts this season. Remember, he came in for Kyle Allen a little bit earlier in the year, and last week played by far a season high 83% of snaps. Ran a season high 31 routes. So I think I said McKinnon, my fault, but J.D. McKissick is someone who it does stand out to me a little bit. And Terry McLaurin's just been pretty much a lockdown animal, no matter where he's getting the ball, no matter how deep the targets are. So I don't know, maybe it's not the craziest idea to spend a little time on Washington this afternoon.
I agree. I think that we're talking about them not only because the quarterback situation changed, so we need to speculate a little bit about how that might affect the offense, but you're exactly right. J.D. McKissick appears to be a heavy part of the passing game for the Washington offense. If you look at quality opportunities, which are what lead to high leverage touches, that's any kind of target for a running back or a goal line carry, J.D. McKissick actually ranks in the top 10 in the league in per game quality opportunities. So one thing we got to mention is, first of all, that's sort of a new player in the running back pool that we can pull from. And he's only has a salary of under $5K on DraftKings this weekend, but also it limits the ceiling of Antonio Gibson, who no matter how elusive he's been, he's way above the historical trend line in his elusive rating via PFF this year. It still is a little bit of a cap on his PPR ability if JD McKissic is getting all this work in the passing game. Now, you did mention that Alex Smith's yard per attempt totals have been low for most of his career. I was actually impressed to see that he had a 10.2 yards per attempt efficiency when he came in against the Giants last week. He threw 32 passes, completed 75% of them, and actually finished with over 325 yards. Now, what's really interesting about that is his receivers did a lot of work in the Yak game. He actually only threw for about 116 air yards, which means his passer air conversion ratio was off the charts. So like you said, I actually really like Terry McLaurin in this matchup. I don't think that we're going to see the Detroit defense able to shut them down. Although I did notice that they were using shadow coverage a lot more, and they used it in a large part in week 9 here. So that's one thing we might see here. Yeah, Desmond Trufant on Adam Thielen for 66.7% of the routes, limiting to Thielen for 1 catch last week. That said, that's not enough to take me off of Terry McLaurin at all. I really like him as the wide receiver 9 in salary this week on DraftKings.
Yeah, and the clear wide receiver 1 for Washington, right? Like sometimes I think when and that's a perfect breakdown, Matt. When you look at Washington, the one thing that really stands out is no matter who's under center, no matter who's throwing the football, Terry McLaurin is going to be their top target. And if that's not the case, well, you're dumb. So always expect volume. And when we can expect volume, you can expect the possibility for a blow-up game, for a ceiling game.
When I in my data deep dive, I use a stat called True Weighted Opportunity Share that tries to bring in air yards and target share. There's one player ahead of Terry McLaurin in that stat, Devontae Adams.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Hey, by the way, thanks for all the kind words in the chat, fellas. Lot of nice stuff early in the show, Matt. People get excited for this Thursday show, so it makes us a lot more excited to be here. I can assure you of that. What about Detroit?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to say good things about the Washington offense and they have a potential to score points in this matchup, then of course we're looking at this game as a possible shootout. Now, one thing I noticed is that this game on some of the boards, on some of the betting boards, it doesn't have a total. So there's a little bit of decision making that we need to do as fantasy gamers to see like what would we decide in an implied total here. I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that there would be over 24, 25 points from either team. Now, I am going to project the Lions to win this game. So I think you've got to look at Matt Stafford to be able to outplay his quarterback 12 salary on DraftKings. I'm looking at the early projection ownerships on Awesemo.com. He's going under 4% ownership. That's just 12th on the main slate. And I really like DeAndre Swift. Again, looking at that quality opportunity stat for running backs, he really has dominated the quality opportunities compared to Adrian Peterson, even though their opportunity share is still about even. We've seen 4 straight games where the opportunity total has been more for Swift than it has been for Peterson. And I don't think it's crazy to say that you could stack Swift with Stafford because he's definitely that passing down back. The only wideout I'm really interested here is actually tight end TJ Hawkinson. We saw Danny Amendola have more snaps and more yards last week, but I just think a lot of the wide receivers without Kenny Golladay in the lineup are thin plays.
Okay. Are you anticipating Kenny Golladay is sure to sit this one out?
Yeah, I was actually surprised to see that he's in on the projections on Awesemo.com right now. So I will eat my words if he's in. It just seemed like when they signed Mohamed Sanu that they were planning for a multi-week absence with Kenny Golladay. Obviously, I think I've said this before on the show, the whole ceiling of the offense and the probability of this game becoming a shootout skyrockets with Kenny Golladay in the lineup, even at less than 100%.
Jacksonville and the Green Bay Packers. Jacksonville, or I should say Green Bay, laying 13.5 points. The total opened at 53.5. It's come down to 50. But we have to start with the Jacksonville side. We'll start with the road team coming into Lambeau Field. Minshew, this is the crazy part, right? That Doug Marrone intimated, he didn't say it for sure, but suggested that It's possible Minshew does not resume duties as the Jaguars, and I quote, starting quarterback once he recovers from his right thumb injury. John Shipley of SI.com reports that wouldn't be a huge surprise to me. Minshew just hasn't been particularly good. This team continues to lose games, and Jake Luton actually didn't play poorly at all. As a matter of fact, he eclipsed 300 yards in his first game at the NFL level. Long, deep touchdown to DJ Chark to start that game out. He only threw one touchdown to one interception. He did fumble, didn't lose it, but he had a rushing touchdown as well. Again, though, got over 300 yards against surely an inferior Houston defense. I've got to tell you, Matt, I think the house of cards comes crashing down, and he plummets back to earth this week in Green Bay against the Packers.
Yeah. The Houston the Houston defense is certainly one we're still exploiting, especially when it has their top cornerback, Bradley Roby, out for disciplinary reasons. So we got to take his decent first NFL start with a little bit of a grain of salt. And I'm like you. I don't really have high hopes for Luton in this, or Luton. I'm not actually sure how to say his name yet.
I believe it's Luton.
Luton, to repeat his performance in Green Bay. It really doesn't look like a great spot for the Jacksonville offense. That said, I certainly didn't see DJ Chark having the game that he had. We also saw him throw a 73-yard touchdown on his second pass, and then the Houston defense was able to hold him without a passing touchdown for the rest of the game. It's not to say that the guy just got lucky, but there's still going to be a massive amount of variance. And what you're saying is that the variance might swing much towards the negative, especially or as long as Jaire Alexander comes back for the Green Bay Packers.
I think it will, yeah. The Packers defensively their strength has been their secondary. Now, you talk about Jaire Alexander. That's clearly a big part of this. You know, he's been arguably I don't even know if it's arguable at this point, the best corner in the league this year. But while Jake Luton definitely had some, shining moments in his debut, you're right. The 75 or 74 of those yards in his lone touchdown came on busted coverage from Houston to open up that game. That was terrible, terrible coverage. Go back and watch that if you missed it. Terrible.
It was like the old Chad Pennington just lofted up.
Yeah, there was no reason that should have happened, but it did. I'll be honest with you, Matt. Even James Robinson, who we've had a lot of success targeting this season, and give the man credit. Nobody anticipated this being the case, right? Nobody thought that this would be. No one knew early on that Fournette would be released, and then that Raquel Armstead would not play at all as he has experienced complications with COVID-19. No one anticipated that happening. No one thought that James Robinson would be the go-to guy, getting 20 plus touches almost every single game. He's had 47 carries and 8 targets over his last 2 starts. I just think this could really get away from them. And I saw an interesting stat. I want to read this stat to you. I'm going to pull it up right now. I think you'll find it interesting. Okay. So here we go. It's under my likes. So use that as a little bookmark here. Here we go. With the Packers playing the 1-7 Jaguars, here's an interesting note. This is from Rob Domofsky on Twitter. Aaron Rodgers has never lost to a team with a winning percentage of 125 or worse at any point in the season. He's 8-0 in those games with the Packers winning by an average of 18.4 points. Now, look, that's just one piece of the puzzle. It doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but I just don't really see much of a path at home in Green Bay where Jacksonville makes this a competitive game. I just don't see it happening. As a matter of fact, I think Aaron Jones goes nuclear on them as he's fully healthy, and you get a monster game from him. Unless you have anything else on Jacksonville, we can talk about Green Bay.
I think I fully agree with you, but I think the public is going to see that way as well, just because of the implied points of both teams. So if you're going to use this game, particularly in GPPs and tournaments, playing the game flow or the expected game script differently than that will help differentiate your lineups. Like if there is a possibility in your mind that the Jaguars actually keep this game close or even take the lead for some reason, then James Robinson becomes this fantastic contrarian play. He's 5th in expected fantasy points among running backs, and he's 6th in salary. Now, that's incredibly steep for a player, like you said, that is expected to get blown out, and we're really expecting the other side to just walk all over them. But that does give us an opportunity for leverage. I'm seeing he's only the 11th running back in projected ownership, under 10%. And you're probably getting a player who, regardless of game flow, is getting 30% or more of the opportunity. So even as just a simple usage option, just a player who is going to get 20 looks in a game is a solid play in DFS. So I agree with you. I think it's really thin, and it's a possibility that he gets phased out. They bring in Chris Thompson, but in tournaments, multi-entering, I don't think it's the worst idea either.
Okay. Yeah, my big thing here is that if I wanted to get to that side, I'm a little bit hesitant to go to Robinson. I'm with you that, maybe with his volume, it's been very encouraging. My concern is that you could see a steep drop off in volume. If Alexander doesn't play, though, and you can run it back with Sharp as they get blowout run, that could be a play as well. Do you think Alexander's going to suit up?
Alexander, or who do you mean there? Sorry.
Jair Alexander.
Sorry. Yes, I was thinking the other side. I apologize
okay.
there. I do think he's going to suit up. Looking at ESPN injuries, it says that he's getting in limited work. I'm sorry, I completely blanked there.
You're good. Yeah, you made me second guess myself for a second there. On the Green Bay side, though, you have, again, they're 13.5-point favorites. I do trust Aaron Rodgers and company to put a beating on Jacksonville in this game. Now, look, I thought Ben Roethlisberger and the Pittsburgh Steelers would come into Dallas and lay a hurting on the Cowboys, even though they were on the road. That Cowboys team, the turmoil was, unthinkable, almost unparalleled based on where they were expected to be this season to where they were in Week 9. It was bad. And they came in there and took a 2-score lead over Pittsburgh. And James Conner did nothing. And Ben Roethlisberger couldn't do a thing until the second half, where they went empty backfield on like 30 straight plays. It was unthinkable, but here we are. These things do happen. Call me crazy, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This may be a fool me twice scenario, Matt, but I don't think it happens to Green Bay. I really like Aaron Jones this week in the backfield.
Yeah, I do too. And I just want to clarify one thing. I read the wrong line. Alexander did not practice.
Oh, well, that could change things if you're looking to run it back with someone like DJ Chark, just knowing that he has that ceiling.
Yep, I agree. And I just want to make sure our viewers get the right info there. Sorry for misspeaking. So again, that doesn't change what you just said either. Again, I'm saying the same thing here. The most likely game flow involves Aaron Jones just running all over people. That said, I did notice that the projections for Jones comes in a little bit lower than that running back 2 salary. I'm not counting Christian McCaffrey among the salaries because I know he's not going to be owned by the field. He is the highest priced running back. We're just ignoring him. Of the healthy running backs, Aaron Jones is number 2 with a 7,100 salary this weekend. And you're not going to be alone at all. It looks like he's approaching 30% ownership. It looks like 27.7 is the latest ownership projection on Awesemo.com. So that doesn't mean at all that it's a bad play at all. You're just going to have to differentiate in other ways. It right. Certainly could happen. But I personally, I like the Rodgers-Adams stack, even though it's super expensive. Again, we've said this a couple times on previous shows that paying up to be contrarian with players that we know should get huge workloads in the passing game can be really great ways to differentiate ourselves in tournaments. So I really like Adams even more than Jones.
And we just had a question in chat about Jones or Adams in cash. There's really no wrong way to go. You're going to be able to get Adams just based on playing Mike Davis at 4K. So that's going to open things up a little bit. Christian McCaffrey, by the way, following a second opinion, he has a very good chance of playing next week, which is super encouraging because it looks for a moment like he might be done for the season. When you hear second opinion, that's not usually good news. But Alan Lazard is going to be back. At least we assume that he'll be back. He had a chance to play in prime time the other day. Wasn't the case. I think that was Thursday Night Football?
Yes.
Yeah, Thursday night. So I'm assuming that he's active here. He plays. Marquez Valdez-Scantling made the most of his 2 receptions. Both of them went for touchdowns against San Francisco. And then someone like Robert Tonyan, he has fallen off recently after, a couple big games to start the year. He's still there. You're just not really anticipating a monster game from him. If you are going with the Rodgers-Adams stack, do you like anyone as a second option in the passing game for the Packers in what should be a blowout?
Yeah, I think it's not a bad idea. It reminds me of the game a few weeks ago where we expected the Chiefs to just completely blow out the Jets, and it turns out that having a huge Mahomes stack was the way to win the week. Again, these are going to be thin plays, especially with Lazard coming back in the lineup. The Awesemo projections are a little bit higher on Alan Lazard compared to his wide receiver 54 salary, and the same can be said about Robert Tonyan. His salary has finally moved down outside of the top 15 tight ends. You're only going to have to use 3,600 in salary. And his expected fantasy points among tight ends is actually really high. I noticed it's 5th among tight ends. We know that's touchdown dependent, but again, we're hunting for touchdowns with tight ends most of the time anyway. So I don't think it's a bad play at all there. I think that might be the first place I go, simply as a salary saver move. I don't think it's a bad play there. But again, I'm looking at Adams first and foremost there. Jacksonville has the 9th worst schedule adjusted fantasy points to tight ends. So yeah, I think I'll have some Tonyan this week.
Okay. Let's keep it rolling here. Yeah. And by the way, someone asked if Alan Lazard's going to play. I don't know, but he traveled with the team to San Francisco last week. It sure appeared that he is, if I had to guess, he's closer to playing than not playing. I don't know if you have the injury report pulled up, Matt. Do you have his status from yesterday's practice by any chance?
Yeah, on ESPN injuries, which usually has everyone on the injury report, he's not even listed. So that gives me good hope that he's going to play.
Or is that because he's still on the IR?
Let's check this out.
Yeah,
I'll get back to you. We'll move on.
Yeah, we'll move. Just pay attention. It's not a huge deal here, but it's worth paying attention to throughout the week. Keeping it moving, Houston and Cleveland. Houston at Cleveland, I should say. Cleveland 3.5-point favorites, 49-point total. Matt, I think this game has very sneaky shootout potential. And when I say sneaky, I mean there are a couple games on this slate with totals north of 54. This one is south of 50. And while it isn't one of the highest on the slate, I certainly think we need to be looking at this and saying, hey, there are a few ways that this game could pop off. There are a few directions we could go here that make for very, very good stacks. And whenever you have a Houston team in the mix that has 2 speed guys on the outside that can rip off huge plays, and now assuming David Johnson sits with that concussion, should be 3 down back and a pass catching back in Duke Johnson. And then, of course, on the other side, we'll play it by ear as far as the backfield goes with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb potentially being activated. There are a lot of intricacies here that make this a very interesting game.
Absolutely. I think that's really well said. And Duke Johnson's going to be...
I only say things well, man. That's all. Everything I say is well said.
Yeah. Well, then I'll make sure to tell you when it's not well said, just so throw you off your rocker. No, I completely agree. And Duke Johnson's going to be an important player on this slate, just in the way that we'll certainly get to him, that Mike Davis at 4K is how you utilize him is going to influence how you look at the whole slate. Duke Johnson's right behind him at a 5K salary on the DraftKings main slate, and looking at a possible bell cow role. I already see the Awesemo projections have him inside of the top 10 running backs, and he's outside the top 25 in salary. So, of course, you're not going to be alone. We're going to see huge ownership from him if David Johnson sits. This all assumes that David Johnson sits. But I don't know how you couldn't use him as a great leverage play. And then there's all these exciting lineups you can make with putting Mike Davis and Duke Johnson as these cheap chalk running backs, and then differentiating your lineups from there. Now let's take a look at the matchup here. Again, like you said, we're seeing a slightly lower total here, and I understand it from Cleveland's perspective, because Cleveland, especially if they get Nick Chubb back, is going to be shortening the game by giving the ball to their running backs, even if it's through the passing game. Baker Mayfield's only thrown for 250 yards all game. That doesn't necessarily stop Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller, and Brandon Cooks from playing that speed game that we consistently see from them. I think that early touchdown for Brandon Cooks against Jacksonville is the epitome of what Houston as an offense wants to be. That's what their identity is aiming to be. And then just looking at the projections for Fuller and Cooks compared to their salary-based expectations, both look solid. Even though Fuller's 10th among wide receivers in salary, the Awesemo projections right there in line. And he's 13th in ownership right now. Cooks, even better, 26th in salary, 22nd in projection in fantasy points. And I'm seeing only 7% ownership for him. So I like this stack a lot. Deshaun Watson projected inside the top 5 quarterbacks. And I'm not completely scared of the Cleveland defense whatsoever. Looking at their yards per attempt, they're just 16th. They're just league averages this season. They're nothing to scare you off of a decent projection for all 3 players.
I should mention too, Chad talked about the wind in the Green Bay game. Yeah, there's going to be wind. You have some people say that the way that the direction that stadium faces and the way that it's constructed, it does a decent job of neutralizing wind unless it's really bad. But, if it's something you want to keep in mind, go for it. We do expect to have considerable amount of wind in this Cleveland game as well. Matt, we've mentioned this a lot. I usually don't make big decisions based on weather unless it's like very, very significant. So my suggestion would just be play this one by ear. I do think that wind is more predictable than like precipitation. So we're probably going to have a pretty windy game, 22 miles per hour in Cleveland. And I guess, unfortunately, the concern would be that when you have 2 guys that are legitimate deep threats, if the wind gets a hold of one of those or all of those balls, it becomes less appealing. But Matt, on the other hand, it's also possible that everyone decides that they want to get away from this game because of the wind, and then it could create opportunity.
Yeah, I agree there. I am going to change my opinion about this game if there is significant wind. We just saw the Browns really mishandle a weather game.
Yep.
Last time they were on the field. Like 3 points is just an abysmal offensive showing in the NFL. I get it that they're looking to have Nick Chubb back, although I should mention that in the post-practice press conference, he did not make any promises about being able to return to the game field this week. He is back on the practice field. Yeah, I'm legitimately concerned about this Browns offense. And frankly, we just haven't seen enough non-wind time with this offense without Odell Beckham to really know what we're going to get. Yes, a couple weeks ago, we saw the Browns throw 5 touchdowns against the Bengals defense, which is prone to have bad defensive games. But that's really the type of game we're looking for from Baker Mayfield, assuming he comes, he's off the COVID list, but we're not 100% sure he'll play. We're needing a multi-touchdown game from Baker Mayfield for him to really hit as the quarterback 12 in salary this week. And especially if weather isn't on his side, they're going to keep the ball in Kareem Hunt's hand. They're going to keep the ball in Nick Chubb's hands, even if it didn't work out as well last week.
Yeah, I think Mayfield pretty much a lock to play because he never actually tested positive for COVID, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. Here's where I think opportunity will bestow itself upon us in this game in the event that the wind is bad. Duke Johnson, assuming David Johnson is out, being able to get those short extension of the run type passes to someone like Johnson could be really beneficial. And then on the other side, if, as you mentioned, Nick Chubb, no lock to play, we'll find out on Friday whether or not he'll be activated. If Nick Chubb is out, I think Kareem Hunt is also going to be a very solid potential option as a 3-down back. That could really open things up for both of them, especially if the conditions are windy enough to stunt the passing game. I would look towards both backs here. And Matt, the very simple reason for that is 3-down backs gives you plenty of opportunity. I would assume they see even additional opportunity in the wind. So that's where I'm looking at in this game, in the event that it is an issue. I'll be going to both of these running backs. And I think both of them have pretty reasonable price points as well.
Yeah, I love this stat that I'm seeing in chat here that the Texans have allowed 22 fantasy points per game on the ground. And I'm seeing it here in schedule adjusted fantasy points. That's fantasy points over or under the opponent's average, 4th worst in the NFL. So I see it here. The only problem, of course, is that both backs are so talented when they're on the field together, they end up vulturing quality touches from each other. They're just so talented that they're worth playing, especially in a bad weather environment.
All right.
Can't get off of them.
Anything else here? I think we covered it.
Yeah, I'm not really looking at the Cleveland passing game. Jarvis Landry, he does have a projection better than his wide receiver 20 salary, worth mentioning.
All right. Yeah, you said Landry, right? He's actually, I was pretty surprised. He's getting double-digit ownership right now. I guess, sub 59 or sub 6K opens things up, and just Houston's defense in general is rough. Not to mention Odell Beckham being sidelined on the IR should free it up as well. But we'll pay attention to the weather there. It could play a role for sure. Philadelphia, New York Giants. This should be a fun one. Philadelphia laying 3.5 on the road, 44.5 point total. The cavalry finally arrives for Philadelphia. These guys are practicing, Matt. Miles Sanders was limited, but I anticipate that he will play this week. You even have someone like Alshon Jeffrey, believe it or not, fully practicing, should be returning, but it all comes down to the best player on this team. No, it's not Carson Wentz. His name is Travis Fulgham, friends. I love this guy. Listen, obviously I speak in hyperbole when I talk about him, but I really, really think like they found the diamond in the rough, and I think he's legitimately good. His route running, I was watching breakdowns of him, like his route running is good. And yeah, sorry, you guys have to listen to the once a week Travis Fulgham rant, so hang tight. The route running is solid, and I have a point here though, Matt. The ability to come down with contested balls, his catch radius has looked good, and it's come against some good teams. The reason I bring all this up is with Alshon Jeffrey returning, with Jalen Reagor back in the lineup, how much do we anticipate Fulgham getting worked in? I'm still, until further notice, going to assume that this guy continues to get starting wide receiver snaps. And if he doesn't, I think Doug Peterson and company are really stupid if they limit his snaps so Alshon Jeffrey can get more and guys like John Hightower can get more. That to me would make no sense at all. He has easily been their best skill player over the past 3 weeks.
Oh, no doubt about it. And, he's had 100% route participation since he entered the starting lineup in week 4. I don't know if we're going to see 100% anymore as they get healthier, but you're exactly right. What I imagine at this point for Alshon Jeffrey is a red zone weapon. Tyler Eifert when he's not 100% back in the day, someone that they can utilize, particularly with Zach Ertz not available yet for them. I don't know how you get away from using Travis Fulgham as a deep threat or just simply as a weapon. I also noticed that he's at a 20.5% slot rate. So they're clearly moving him all around the field. If you want to bring Reagor on the outside and Alshon on the outside, you can still move Fulgham inside and utilize his skill set. I kind of agree with you. I see that he's 15th in true weighted opportunity share. There's an old saying that it takes talent to earn targets or air yards. So it's just a player that has emerged out of nowhere that is looking at the same type of opportunity, again, not the same team type, but as Tyler Lockett, as Will Fuller, Jamison Crowder. Those are the players around him in that metric true weighted opportunity share. Yes, I agree with you. We're probably going to see a situation where they work Alshon Jeffrey and they give him some coordinated scripted looks if he plays just to get his body back in the game, which is going to take away from Fulgham's usage, but I'm not getting away off of it. One thing I will say, I mentioned a study a couple of weeks ago related to divisional games later in the year. And I want to mention that again, when we see teams playing each other for the second time, we see higher variance in the totals of those games. And more often that variance leans towards the under. That doesn't take us off any of these players. It just lowers the probability of a shootout. So I do want to mention that as we're talking about these multiple wide receiver options. First of all, for your sake, Dave, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see the Eagles come out with Miles Sanders just slinging the ball around and getting Carson Wentz deep passes galore like we kind of saw in week 1 before the wheels really fell off. That said, we just have to lower the probability of that happening. I really like Fulgham still. He's wide receiver 13 in salary, and the Awesemo projections are right in line from there. You can absolutely play him.
You can. It's crazy, though. If you want to get an idea of whether or not he's been legitimately good, Pro Football Focus has this as a shadow coverage matchup with James Bradbury against Travis Fulgham, where when they faced them a few weeks back, they did not have it that way, and it was not a shadow matchup. So we don't necessarily know if it will be, but you're good when an opposing team is putting their quote unquote lockdown corner on you. I think I really love Fulgham going forward. I'm not as high on him this week. I do think, though, if he's getting that type of volume and he's been a red zone threat, if you're stacking, like let's just say, and Matt, by the way, anecdotally speaking, you said you did or read a study on it about it being lower scoring games. Just anecdotally, when you look at NFC East games, generally speaking, you get some very low scoring games. Yep, you really do. You know this. So again, it's anecdotal, but it is something that if you've watched them over the years, you know this. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this low scoring. But is there some intrigue when it comes to a Philly stack, running it back with like an Ingram or a Shepard or something, just given that you're getting a little bit healthier now that Ertz is out, but Dallas Goedert was their number one guy before he got hurt early in the season. Travis Fulgham's been good. Jalen Reagor came back, looked pretty solid. Miles Sanders back in the mix, presumably. Can we get there, or are you just shying away from the Eagles as a stack?
I don't think it's a crazy idea. I did notice that in the top stacks tool on Awesemo.com, we're looking at the 9th best team in terms of value. That's not particularly high. That doesn't rule it out entirely. But if you want the best value receiver, looking at our projections this week, it's Dallas Goedert. I'm seeing he's the tight end 9 in salary, but that's 4,200 on DraftKings this week. And the projection puts him inside the top 5. Now, you're not going to be alone. I'm seeing almost 13% ownership for him projected at this point. But still, I really think that if you want to get to Wentz and Goddard and then see how one of these receiver pieces fit in, then you should run it back. Then try to run it back and put that into a tournament there. Probably looking at Evan Ingram first and foremost, though I don't like his salary at tight end 6. But I don't think it's the craziest idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's an insane idea, just given that his volume has sharply ticked upwards lately, which is encouraging. And something you've heard me mention a lot, Matt, is just Evan Ingram is one of those tight ends that is athletic enough and physical enough and quick enough to get downfield and actually make some big plays, instead of someone that you have to rely upon to get you like 6 receptions, each of them, with an average depth of like 5 yards. You know what I mean? So I do think there is that benefit to Evan Ingram, that they will target him downfield. And at a tight end position, it's been a weak position this season. We got a lot of injuries, so you don't have a whole lot of that.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to mention a slightly different game script alternative. I don't think it's a crazy idea to say, hey, this might shoot out. Again, variance means it could go up or could go down. But I did notice in the PFF net advantage metrics, that's when you compare the entire offensive metrics on PFF to a team to their opposing defensive metrics. Both teams come out in the negatives. So that might be a way we might look at the defenses there. I am noticing that the Giants defense is projected for way better than their defense 12 salary on DraftKings. We know there's a lot of variance in projections there, but that looks pretty good.
I don't think that's crazy at all. You want to get cheap at the position? Go for it. Carson Wentz has proven that he's very capable of turning the ball over a lot. We've seen that time and time again. All right, so you want to move on to Tampa and Carolina, because we got a lot to talk about with this one.
Yeah, for sure. Let's
do it. Hang tight, fellas. Buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be this game has a lot to cover, and we need to, because this could be pivotal. Remember, everything I say well, man. This could be pivotal in how lineups and tournament winning lineups, bink lineups shape up for week 10. Tampa Bay on the road, they are laying 5.5 points. So they're almost touchdown favorites, 50.5 point total, coming off an embarrassing loss. Wow. In Tampa to New Orleans. It was bad, especially when you have, I used to bring on a guy named Trevor Sikkema for Sirius when I was over at Sirius doing Awesemo Radio. And this guy he's a Tampa Bay Bucks guy. He's also a draft analyst, real sharp fella. And he tweeted the other day, like, he was disgusted. And he said, this might be the worst loss I've ever watched from them. And I responded to him saying, it's worse that the loss is compounded, Matt, by the fact that they had Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette. The list goes on. They have so many talented skill players and could not move the ball an inch against the Saints in a marquee matchup in primetime football. But with that said, as we'll kick it off with the Bucs here, Chris Godwin, when healthy this year, has been very solid. And Tom Brady tends to look his way often as someone that will, when healthy, run a lot of his routes out of the slot, creates a remarkable amount of yards after the catch. He was the best in the league at yards after the catch last season. He was 6 behind Michael Thomas, but he played 2 fewer games. Fantastic yards after the catch type of receiver. You still have Mike Evans, who can be dominant. I don't know what Antonio Brown's role is. And then in the backfield, what do you do against the Carolina team that's been gutted by opposing run games this season? What I'm saying is there will be points scored here, and the Bucs are going to score points. We just have to figure out where it's going to come from. But I think they're going to lay it on the Carolina Panthers. But how and where and what are we getting to, if anyone?
Hey, great breakdown. I really can't imagine the public thinking of this game for the Buccaneers side as anything but the classic Brady FU bounce back.
Yep,
it just has that feeling. And so one thing I will say before we get excited about this entire offense in this spot where they should blow up is you're not going to be alone thinking that way, thinking that the game script moves that way. So find ways to differentiate yourself.
But how much does it translate to ownership is my question.
That's a great point. And, you mentioned it that in your breakdown, the Carolina Panthers are 5th worst in the NFL in schedule adjusted fantasy points to running backs. We did see a little bit of an upswing for Leonard Fournette in terms of quality usage. He is getting more passing looks. And Bruce Arians, I believe, a few weeks ago referred to him as a nickel running back, which is actually not something I'd heard before, but I love the concept. Passing down, 2-minute drill, goal line. In case you didn't know, that's exactly where we want our running backs being used. So even if you just decide, okay, well, I don't care about that, Ronald Jones is going to get the touchdowns, that's a great way to differentiate yourself. Now, I will say about the Monday night game, it really felt like the Buccaneers didn't care about the spotlight whatsoever, and they were just going to put Brown in, see what they had in him, and almost view the first half as a preseason game. It had the feeling of a preseason game where Brady and co didn't mind going 3 and out a couple of rounds. The problem was the Saints didn't get the memo, and they were scoring on every single drive. In fact, they would have been up 3 touchdowns even sooner had Jared Cook not fumbled at the goal line. So they got pummeled because their offense not only was out of sorts, just looked like a brand new offense. They were trying Fournette in new ways. They were obviously using Brown in new ways. And like you said, they were healthy for kind of the first time. So I don't know. Is it going to be like the Heat when the big 3 moved there and it took them a month to finally click and then they started owning people's souls? Maybe. But right now, the projections aren't that great for the passing game. Tom Brady, quarterback 9 in salary, quarterback 14 in our Awesemo projections. Mike Evans, wide receiver 15 in salary. The Awesemo projections say that makes absolutely no sense. Have him outside the top 35. Only Chris Godwin, who's inside the top 20 in DraftKings salary on the main slate, has a projection in line with that salary-based expectation. So I think when you're looking at this team, you're looking at a team that probably is going to go a little bit over-owned because of that narrative we started this conversation off with. People think it's going to be a blow-up game. The projections say it's not so sure.
You think they could be over-owned, huh, in relation to the projections?
I think it's a definite possibility. That said, the ownership projections
are
don't
super
look terrible.
Low.
Yeah.
That's like Godwin's at 8%. Everyone else on this entire team is 2% or lower.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. I wonder if that's going to change as the week goes on too, as we get more information. Those ownership projections in particular fluctuate as the fantasy industry basically coalesces around certain teams and certain players. Yep. But I think the probability of the Buccaneers passing game is not fully enveloped in these ownership projections yet. I think we should see that change.
The one counterpoint to that is there are so many mouths to feed on this team that people just might avoid it because they don't know where to go with all of them. And
in that case, we should see Brady's projection at least solid because they'll just want to get Brady and see how he sprays the ball this first game.
It's possible.
The second game, yeah.
If this ownership stays this low, though, you guys should be jumping on this. Like,
I think that's right.
At 2%. I think if Evans comes in at 2% against Carolina, Godwin at 8%. I think you and I have slightly different opinions on this game, which is good. But overall, you have a 28-point implied total for Tampa, and I don't need much of a narrative to know that Carolina very likely going to cough up some points, but they can score, which makes these games kind of interesting. So make that transition over to Carolina here. Christian McCaffrey, he's not going to play this one, and he has a realistic chance for next week, which is good news, but not going to play here. Mike Davis, erroneously priced at minimum salary. I know DraftKings can't always get it right with injuries. It's tough to know. The Christian McCaffrey thing came out the day after the owner or the salaries were released, but at $4,000, he's going to be owned everywhere, Matt. He's a cash game lock, but what about tournaments?
Yeah. Was there a time where they waited and for that Monday night game before they put out salaries? I don't know.
Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago because we couldn't even do a first look show. There were no salaries. I think that was more contingent upon all of the COVID-19 mess that was happening with games getting moved around, having having a Tuesday night game and all that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I digress. It really is a situation where you've got the 44th highest salary running back projected inside the top 3 running backs. It's really hard to move off of him. Really, there's so much to do with your lineup. Once a 4K player that you feel really comfortable about at the running back position moves in, that we can find ways to differentiate our lineups, get a low ownership lineup in there fully. But like I said, how you play Mike Davis on the Week 10 slate really is going to be your biggest obstacle, your biggest question mark for DFS players this week. It's that simple. Now, the Carolina offense, as you said, has been relatively pass heavy. In fact, they rank within the top 7 teams in true early down pass rate. That's in neutral situations. They're passing on first and second down more than most any team in the NFL. That's great because it adds to the amount of plays in a game. Obviously, with passing, we see more yards per play on teams. And we're getting some clarity here in regards to DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. It's over, guys. Robbie Anderson is the wide receiver 1 on this team. With the way that Teddy Bridgewater likes to throw the ball, especially he prefers the middle of the field and towards the hash marks, that's where Robbie Anderson has excelled this year. DJ Moore, a great outside receiver. It just doesn't align perfectly with what Teddy Bridgewater does. That said, we're still talking about a player who is mispriced now as the wide receiver 34 in DJ Moore on DraftKings. 5,100 for a player that Awesemo has projected inside the top 20 is a fantastic value. But I'll tell you what, the Robbie Anderson projection has him inside the top 10 here, and he's wide receiver 17 in salary. So I really like a Carolina stack and then trying to run it back with Tampa Bay. And that's really what the top stack tool on Awesemo.com is saying as well here, at least at this point in the week. They're second in stack value looking at that page on Awesemo.com.
This game is going to make a difference. I'm telling you right now, I'm having a tough time with this game because of, number one, on the Tampa Bay side, even if they are under-owned, appropriately owned, over-owned, who do you go to? Who's getting the football? What is Antonio Brown's role going to look like in his second week with Tampa Bay? And on the other side, yeah, just a solid breakdown, Matt, with the wide receivers here. DJ Moore's price continues to fall. He's going to be below, if he has a bad game here, he's going to be below 5K. He's going to be below 5K next week, which is pretty incredible, given the hype surrounding him coming into this season. And really, the guy's just super talented. But I'm willing to get back to the passing game here, whether it be DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson. Quickly, what do you say about Mike Davis? Your final thoughts for tournaments, given that his ownership right now is eclipsing 53% on DraftKings?
I'm eating the chalk. I mean, I'm not going to have 100% Mike Davis, but I'm fine eating the chalk. I'm not going to be differentiating myself in huge ways. Although we've mentioned a couple alternative leverage plays that are a little bit more than that 4,000 salary, but don't break the bank, don't use a ton of your budget. Duke Johnson comes immediately to mind at 5,000. So if you want to move off of him, it's not impossible. I just can't see it. It's just it. Even in tournaments, it's one of those things where I can find different ways, alternative stacks and run backs to make my lineup different in that way.
All right. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The one thing here too, though, is just that yards per attempt for them when it comes to what they've allowed on the ground. It's a little bit concerning to me. It's a little bit concerning. League best or worse, depending on which way you look at it. 3.3 yards per attempt to opposing rushers, 701 yards, third lowest in the league. They have allowed 7 rushing touchdowns, but they have not allowed many long. They've only allowed 3 runs of 20 plus yards. That's crazy. No runs of 40 plus. The longest run they've allowed this season is like 25. So ultimately, I do think, and I don't blame anyone for eating the chalk, Matt. And I think my opinion on this has been evolving a little bit as the week goes on. I do think there's a realistic chance that Mike Davis doesn't get there at 4K.
Hey, and you know what? Because of ownership, you can make bold choices this week. I'm not saying do it, but you can make bold choices and say, I'm way under on Mike Davis if I'm multi-entering, because I know if the players that I move into that lineup instead of Davis do better, I'm moving ahead of so much of the field if he underperforms. I did notice the same stats as you in that yards per carry department for Tampa Bay. When you look at schedule adjusted fantasy points, and it might be that touchdowns are boosting this number, they're really just within 1 point of players average. So it's not enough for me to move off of the Tampa Bay defense here or move off of the Carolina offense. But I hear what you're saying completely.
Okay. Let's move on. We've got Denver and the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders favored here by, last I checked, 5.5 points. 5 now. 51-point total. Denver Broncos bailed me out big time. Had a lot of Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy last week. Unfortunately, not a lot of Noah Fant as well. That injury wasn't great. Early on in that game, this fella looked great. Thought we were about to be cruising to money, but Drew Lock comes up big. Atlanta collapses late in that game, holds on to the win nonetheless, but still turned into a great game. Unfortunately, Julio Jones, as my key run back, was actually the guy that hurt it the most. The Broncos get the Raiders this week. Drew Lock coming off easily his best game this season. It's not even remotely close. 300 plus yards, 2 scores through the air, 1 score on the ground. Inefficient, but I don't really care about that. I can't say that I'm super intrigued by the Denver Broncos this week, though. Had a lot more interest in them in week 9, especially when salaries were a little bit cheaper than they were. Not to mention, Matt, Jerry Jeudy did not practice yesterday. That's something to pay close attention to. Tim Patrick was a limited participant. I do anticipate him playing, though, knowing that he was limited most of last week and was active.
Oof, I love that video that was going viral of Jerry Jeudy running the fake go route. Did you see this one where he holds up his hand like he's open and comes out? Oh, great football there.
Kid's got talent. He's just got to stop dropping footballs and he's going to be a stud.
Absolutely. And, I also saw a thread, I believe was a former PFF analyst who said that the people underground charting every play at PFF say that Jeudy is open way more than Locke is able to deliver him the ball. So that's just something to put in the back pocket there, that there's upside in just the player's talent, like you said. Obviously,
it's funny too because you mentioned that. There's no doubt about it. I believe it. I haven't seen the numbers, but it's also funny that the Broncos have the highest drop rate in the entire league as well. If any quarterback, Drew Lock has the highest drop rate of anyone that's attempted more than like 75 passes. So it definitely goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really a great point. And like you said, I had a ton of Noah Fant. I'm hoping that he's able to return to somewhat full strength this week. And, this game, assuming that Jeudy comes back, is fairly easily stackable because I don't think we're going to see KJ Hamler. He got injured last week, if I remember that correctly. And I don't love the running backs in this game. So if I'm looking anywhere in this game, I am looking at the Broncos. I think I'm a little more bullish on this team than you sounded in that opening paragraph there. I just like the Drew Lock in a dome stats. It's not a huge sample size, but he's well outperformed his fantasy point average in dome situations. And it's not like the Vegas Raiders are a great defense. They've given up 3.6 fantasy points per game over opponents' average to opposing quarterbacks there. And you're seeing really low ownership right now. He's projected at under 2% ownership. I think you could do a lot worse than Drew Lock, Jerry Jeudy stacks, assuming he plays. Now, if Jeudy doesn't play, now you're talking about some of the absolute most important weapons on the outside for Denver not being able to play. Obviously, Courtland Sutton's gone. It's almost just a stay away offense if Jeudy is out this week. I think the probability of a shootout is really low in that case.
Yeah, so do I. By the way, you have 6 games, I repeat, 6 games in the 4 p.m. Eastern hour. So it's pretty crazy. This is the wildest we've seen all year. Only 5 1 p.m. games. So more games on the second slate, the afternoon slate, than the first. There's probably going to be some huge contests across the industry too. So that should be a lot of fun. What about the Vegas side of the ball? I got to tell you, man, I'm not super high on this game. I could understand where anyone that likes it is coming from, especially given that Darren Waller at a weak tight end position should be getting, once again, a decent amount of ownership. We have him at, where do we have him right now? At 11%, right around Dallas Goedert, who I like more than him at a discounted price point in a better or equal matchup. But I'm just not huge on the Vegas Raiders this week. Maybe you have more interest in guys like Josh Jacobs than I do at a price point that seems affordable. God, he's been so inefficient though.
Right, and he doesn't get passing down work, which is why in PPR formats, I think we said this last week, it's really hard to trust him because we need efficiency and touchdowns, which is not something we love to do. That said, 30 attempts is a lot different than 20 attempts in fantasy football. Simple as that, because the upside, your touchdown rate can be a lot higher if you have more chances. I did notice that the Awesemo projections are bullish on Josh Jacobs at his running back 7 salary. He's up inside the top 3 running backs. When I first look at this game, I certainly didn't see it that way. If you look at schedule adjusted fantasy points, the Broncos are just league average. So it's not, minus 2.2 points under fantasy points per game average for running backs. And, we've seen almost nothing from Henry Ruggs. And so you're really looking at Nelson Aguilar and Hunter Renfrow if you're not looking at Darren Waller, which is why you're seeing ownership coalesce around Darren Waller. Like you said, 11%, but that's still just the 3rd highest tight end. People are choosing value options over him. The Awesemo projections really like him, even as the tight end 1 in salary this week. The Awesemo projections are right there with it.
Aguilar has been targeted 3 or fewer times in 6 of 8 games this season. One of them was 9 targets. The other one, where he was targeted more than 3 times, was 4. I'm getting away from that, and I'll do it with pleasure.
And talk about touchdown dependency. The reason he's valuable is because he scored. That's hard.
Absolutely, and he's catching all of his targets, which just is not sustainable. We have 5 games.
Happen, right? In Philly, that would have been nice in Philly.
Yeah, well, the Philly refused to use him outside, and actually, you know what? There were a lot of deep attempts that he just completely dropped. Going up against Atlanta would have been the game
one I
winner.
remember. Yeah,
down the sideline, that sticks in my memory and in my craw. Would have won the game against the Patriots a couple of years ago in the end zone. Would have won the game. There's a few examples, but we've got 5 games to go here. Brief intermission to tell you about an amazing promo we've got going on. It is Augusta, Augusta. Got it right. Use that at checkout. Get 50% off everything on the site for an Awesemo Plus Platinum Weekly Pass. That's everything, including our ownership projections. Everything you hear us talk about, too. The top stack tool, the player projections, the lineup builder. You can get the Fantasy Cruncher add-on if you want. All of the premium articles that these guys put so much time into. Matt's been churning out a ton of good work, laborious work for sure, but it saves you guys the time for having to do all of that heavy lifting and research on your own. But I mean, seriously, any tool you need to become better at DFS, any tool you need to build good lineups, whether it's single entry, 3 max, or whether it's MME, we've got you covered. Tools are built by the #1 DFS player in the world, Awesemo himself. You might know him as Alex Baker. and just a lot of other phenomenal contributors. Matt, Alex Scher, Adam Scher, Ben Rasa, doing amazing PGA content, Josh Engelman, and so much more. But here's the thing. It's not just all football or golf. It's everything. MMA, you want League of Legends, right? You want esports, you're bored, you want to play a different sport, and you don't feel like doing research. We got you covered there. You name it. Any sport that DraftKings, FanDuel, and these sites have contests for, we have premium content for them. Use Augusta, get you half off everything on the site for the week. Awesemo Plus Platinum Weekly Pass, Augusta at checkout. Check that out. And if you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. My DMs, yes, they are open. I get some grief for that. Why would you do that? Well, because I'm a man of the people. At Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D. And while you're at it, follow my man Matt at Draftaholic. All right, Buffalo at Arizona. Here we go. 5 to go here. We're in the home stretch. Arizona laying 2 points, 56-point total, expecting to see a lot of scoring in this one. Kyler Murray, by the way, I saw a stat, by a number of metrics, has actually been better at this point of the season than Lamar Jackson was last season in his MVP run. That says a lot. He's been awesome. He's running a lot. And you know what? Despite his lack of size, or should I say height, Matt, the man is throwing the football relatively well. He's had some big passing games, and he's got a couple of really solid options in the passing game. I want to start with Tim, and then we can spend some time on Chase Edmonds coming off that 28-touch dud. Imagine something, a 28-touch dud, Matt, in a win where the total went over 60. I don't know.
Did it burn me last week too?
Upside down world.
Yep, that's right. And you know what? We need to talk about one of the reasons why that happened is because Kyler Murray is just such an incredible rusher.
Yep.
Now, if you look at things from a general analytics standpoint, which I know some people roll their eyes, but it's important to me, quarterback rushing is incredibly efficient compared to running back rushing. So I'm not going to fault a team that has a weapon like Kyler Murray for using him all the time in that way. Now, I will say the big difference between Lamar Jackson's MVP run and Kyler Murray's current run is wins, baby, wins. The fact that Baltimore was 14-2 really influenced the fact that he ended up being MVP. But from a statistics standpoint, we're looking at a better overall season right now from Kyler Murray than we were at this point in the season in Lamar Jackson. Simple as that. And you know, the rushing yardage totals have really been just absurd. I think he's had over 60 yards rushing in all but 2 games as a starter. That's just unbelievable. That's running back 2 usage on top of the ability to pass the ball to DeAndre Hopkins every time he drops back. So one of the things that I really like to see is that Christian Kirk over the last 3 weeks, he's had 3 straight 20-plus fantasy outputs. And that's coincided with DeAndre Hopkins not getting quite as much usage because of his injuries. So, he had a 3-target game last week. Part of that was the fact that he was probably being covered up by the defense as much as possible, but also he's not 100%. What did Kyler Murray do? He comes out and he throws 3 touchdowns anyway and runs for 1 on top of 100 yards rushing. We're talking about the number 1 fantasy quarterback over the last 3 weeks by far, facing the number 2 fantasy quarterback this week. There's going to be fireworks in this game. I don't know how you move away from this. Highest shootout probability by far this weekend.
You're damn right it is. In the NFL top stack tool, the top stack probability for Arizona and Buffalo are 2nd and 3rd respectively on the entire slate. Ownership coming right around that 9% mark on both of them. Yeah, I don't know what's not to like here. It's things are going to get wild. What about DeAndre Hopkins at this price? I ask because he was the highest priced receiver last week. He's come down about $500, and Devontae Adams has just soared past all of them. Granted, he was on a Thursday night game last time out, but he's $1,300 more than Hopkins, who is still the 2nd highest priced receiver, sandwiched in between Adams and Metcalf.
Yeah. Again, that the ceiling is so high for Hopkins compared to almost any other player. If you write down a list before you create your player pool every week of just who can get me 30 points, I don't know how you leave DeAndre Hopkins off that list, even if he's not 100%. The Awesemo projections have him inside the top 5 receivers, as they tend to do every single week. It's just comparing that to salary right now. Yeah, the wide receiver 2 in DraftKings salary is always a little bit tough to pay for, but I think it's one of these situations where we're seeing slightly less ownership on Hopkins than we typically do. There's a little bit of leverage there, and we know the probability, as I said, of him getting to that ceiling game is just slightly lower than it was when he was getting 12, 15 targets a game in the beginning of the season.
Man, this game has so much potential. The run game though is crazy because very seldom do you hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, it was a shootout, 65 total points. Arizona puts up 34, and the running back sucked." Well, you say, okay, well, the running back sucked. That makes some sense. He must have been kind of phased out of the offense, and they scored elsewhere, and they got a rushing quarterback. Makes sense. No, he had 25 carries and 3 receptions. And that's what really sucked, Matt, was that 11.8 fantasy points came on 70 yards on 25 attempts and 3 receptions for 18 yards. What a big disappointment. The problem, or not the problem, the thing is, though, that he's got 28 touches. And if we see similar volume, even upwards of 20 again this week, his price has come down $500. Assuming that Kenyon Drake doesn't play, I have to advise going back to someone that saw that much volume. What about you?
Yeah, right now, and again, I could be wrong, I think Drake is pushing to play.
Well, let's assume he doesn't. If he does, okay, it's no longer even a question.
Yeah, so DraftKings moved Chase Edmonds' salary. He's running back 9 still on the main slate here. And again, we're talking about a usage play. If you don't have to be a data analytics nerd to know, if you grouped all the people who had 25 plus touches in a game and looked at their fantasy points, Chase Edmonds' output would be on the very, very low end of what you would expect. So we talk about volume plays all the time. You can play players that are going to get 25 to 30 opportunities regardless of matchup, just because really good things can happen when you get the ball 30 times. So if he does play, and this ends up being the shootout that we think it is, Chase Edmonds is probably going to see valuable looks in this game. It's not going to come cheap, but right now, I don't think that you could say that he's a bad play at 6,300 on the main slate. It just doesn't pop off the page like he did a week ago.
Yeah, I don't disagree there, but volume is king. And if that volume is going to be there in a game with a 56-point total, I'll definitely be turning my attention to Chase Edmonds. Granted, you can't look at ownership right now. Kenyon Drake, we haven't projected in, but if he ends up not playing, Edmonds' price coming down $500 is going to make a difference. I'll say this much too. I know Edmonds wasn't great last week at all. Actually, he was bad, but I also have concerns that if Drake does return, they're going to see. I don't know if Drake's going to be the bell cow back going forward, but even if he is, he just doesn't get any work in the passing game. The reason I ask you this is at 4,900, would you be considering him at sub 5K in a 56-point total game?
I think I would. I don't think it's the worst idea. And again, we're kind of looking, particularly because of Mike Davis this week, we're kind of looking for players in this range, this 4,000 to 5,000 range, that we can use to differentiate our running backs away from Mike Davis, just because we know the ownership's going to be so high. Yeah, it's going to be a really thin play because we know Chase Edmonds is going to be involved. And, looking at the expected fantasy points, this includes all the games where Drake was active with Edmonds. They're actually right next to each other, 19th and 20th in expected fantasy points per game. I don't think it's the worst tournament option right now at the 32nd highest salary on the main slate. It's obvious that he could take high value touches in the passing game taken away from him by Chase Edmonds. And like we said in the beginning of this conversation, the Kyler Murray could easily run for 100 yards and a touchdown, taking away from the running backs. But I think it's a good tournament play, especially at that price.
I think it'll be a clear leverage play if you are underexposed to, not underexposed, but getting away from this full out game stack here. Looking to someone like Kenyon Drake, if he plays, could make for an interesting tournament play. Say you stack Seattle and LA or a couple of other games we talked about that have potential for high scores. And in those lineups, you don't have the passing game or the quarterbacks from this one. Mm-hmm. Kenyon Drake could be actually an interesting way, because if he gets into the end zone 2 times, 3 times, crazier things have happened, right? We've seen him do it. Then you're in really good shape and you're canceling out a lot of those lineups in what will be a high-owned game. What do you do with Buffalo on the other side, Matt? Implied total right now through the roof for both of these teams, should be expected. Like we've said, there's just simply no reason not to want to go here. As it currently stands, 27-point implied total for Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to get away from this game and this team right now, especially because we know where the ball is going to go. First and foremost, the primary receiver, Stephon Diggs, continues to have arguably his best season of his career with Josh Allen. And yes, Josh Allen is in a little bit of the same boat where he does take away from the running back opportunities, but we even know how that's breaking down at this point in the season. We're going to see Devin Singletary used as the passing down back, and we're going to see Zach Moss as they get closer to the goal line. So if we know a bunch of points are going to be scored and a bunch of passing is going to happen, you really have the freedom to play all of those options. And of course, with John Brown getting healthier as well, I'm going to be looking there too. I think at his wide receiver 31 salary this weekend, that's a very, very fair salary. And the Awesemo projections are well ahead of that, have him inside the top 25. And yes, obviously there's a probability that the ball goes other directions other than Brown, but we know when Brown hits, he tends to have 100 yards and a touchdown. And I like those players when they're getting sub 6% ownership in a great shootout game. If they do hit, they have a high probability of 25 plus points. So I like him a lot more than Cole Beasley, although I will mention that Cole Beasley's projection absolutely crushes his wide receiver 42 salary. So I'm not afraid to go there either.
All right. Top plays from this game.
I actually, I'm going to say in a similar vein to Kenyon Drake, Zach Moss is going to be an off the wall play. You're not going to get a ton of ownership there. Not my favorite, but in a tournament, it might be my favorite leverage play. It's still Stephon Diggs. Like, we didn't mention him all that much, but we're talking about just an incredible player with incredible talent on the team in Arizona that is just mediocre in points allowed per play. And yeah, I guess they're top 10 now in yards allowed per attempt, but that's still inside 10% from the league average. That's just not enough to get me off.
All right. Chargers, Miami 2.5-point favorites. Man, I love this team. I really do. I bet they coming into the season though. I said Brian Flores, they're going to play for him. They love this guy, and he's actually a better coach than he gets credit for. I got ripped on for not putting Miami in the bottom 5 teams when I projected who would be the bottom 5 teams this year. I had them outside of it, and people say, "How are you going to put the Jets in there and not the Dolphins?" Well, I don't know.
Look good now, that's for sure.
Yeah, you tell me. But hey, maybe the Dolphins still finish there. It's possible. But I like them, and I think they're playing good football. That game against or last week against Kyler Murray and Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals was super impressive. They came into Arizona and pulled off the win, Matt, against a pretty good Arizona team. I guess I might be overblowing how good they've been, and I'm not sitting here pretending that they've been spectacular. But hey, they've been winning football games against good teams. Now they've gone back-to-back weeks with a double-digit win against the Rams and a close win, dropping 34 points against the Cardinals. I like what I'm seeing here, and it's remarkable that they're favored against the Chargers team that continues to lose games by 1 score every single week. You know, they have a point differential of -9 this year, and they're 2-6. You know how hard that is to be only -9 with a 2-6 record?
It's a riddle. That's what it is. You can't do it.
It is perplexing. You're right.
Wow. Well, we'll start here. They have their quarterback of the future, and you can't say that about every team. Justin Herbert is going to be great, and if they can figure out the rest of the team, and it might take a change in coaching, because part of that, if you have a point differential like that and you're consistently losing close games, it's hard not to look at the coach. I'm sorry, I digress. Miami
I agree with you entirely, by the way,
and I don't think Anthony Lynn is a bad coach, but that's just it's just something where if we see a trend like that and it's leading to losses, you got to eventually say something about it. The Dolphins needed a little help last week from a missed kick, like almost an inexplicably missed kick. It was right on the money, but just came up short for the Arizona Cardinals, I believe Zane Gonzalez, and it helped Miami keep that win. Yeah, I mean, much better game from Tua Tagovailoa. as I said last week on the show, because of the defensive touchdowns, not like they played bad last week either, but because of the defensive touchdowns against the Rams 2 weeks ago, we really just saw Tua get asked to hand the ball off a bunch. At least this time, we really saw him have to lead an offense. He had to score points in order to keep his team in the game. And he threw for 8.9 yards per attempt. He threw 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. He ran for 35 yards, and he threw for over a 70% completion percentage on 28 passes. That is a great, great first showing in a real game script, as I'm going to call it. Now, I was surprised to see that his salary is still within the top 15 quarterbacks. I'm not quite there yet, but I don't think it's an insane idea to say that he has the upside to get into that top 10, even if we haven't seen it yet. Also, with the Chargers' ability to score points these days because of Justin Herbert, you got to look at this passing game, particularly Jakeem Grant, who really sticks out in my mind as someone that you could play this week. I think you could easily stack this team as a contrarian option and then have some chalk running backs to make yourself have a differentiated lineup there. And of course, the run back options on Los Angeles, if you do that, are pretty easy.
Man, there's a lot of injuries here too. The Austin Eckler news, it was later rather than sooner that he'd be returning. Justin Jackson looks like he is leaning towards not playing this week. And then I saw some comments in chat about someone like Tremaine Pope, who had that game in week 8, right? But the problem is that what was he out with a concussion last week? And then it was Kalen Ballage who came in no longer under Adam Gase's tutelage and ends up having a pretty respectable game. I don't know. So you're saying you think the running back spot for the Chargers could be a good differentiation point?
Oh, no, I didn't say that. I said the run back options.
Oh, okay.
If you use a passing stack of the Dolphins. No, okay. I'm with you.
Good to know.
With you. There's a lot of uncertainty here.
There's
and I
so
don't
much uncertainty. And I have no idea which way it's going to go. You can't ignore either that, like, Josh Kelly is still on this team, right? He was still targeted 5 times last week. He still touched the ball 14 times. He still played 54% of the snaps. Ballage played 39%. No one has any idea. So if you're talking about Pope, then you're saying that Josh Kelly gets nothing and that Kalen Ballage, after an actually solid and efficient game in the event that Jackson doesn't play, won't get anything, or all 3 of them get worked in and I want nothing to do with it. I don't know what it's going to be. I still want nothing to do with it. And I have enough respect for Miami's run defense here against a pretty battered up backfield that I can get away from all of this.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would blame you for saying this is a stay away spot. I don't think anyone would blame you for not knowing that Kalen Ballage was a member of the Chargers until last week. It is a situation where,
by the way,
I saw a touchdown Kalen Ballage and I went, wait a minute.
I did not know.
Yeah.
I did not know. I'll be completely honest with you, Matt. Did not know.
And I think you make a great point here, especially if we have Tremaine Pope active again. We really don't know how this is going to shake out. And we like the passing game more than the running backs anyway in this spot as it is. So I will make an educated guess as to how I think this breaks down. I think what they've decided with Joshua Kelly at this point in the season is they are wanting him to play about 50% of the snaps and get about 12 touches per game. And they're not moving off of that regardless of game script. My best guess, again, just guessing here, is that if they're ahead or in a close game, we'll see Kalen Ballage on the ground. And if they're behind or even just one score behind, we'll see Tremaine Pope utilized as that Austin Eckler type running back who's used more as a passing down back. Again, I could be completely off. And in that situation, it might be a situation where we don't want any of them since all 3 of them cannibalize valuable touches from each other. But that's just the way I'm going to guess it goes. Again, I'm looking at Justin Herbert, even though he's the 6th highest quarterback in salary on the main slate. I'm looking at Keenan Allen. I'm using Mike Williams, assuming he's healthy. Man, another one of these catches almost in the end zone where he just completely gives up his body. He's just laying there. It's like, I feel bad for Mike Williams because he's such an athletic player and he's constantly just throwing his body all around. I think it's really simple the way you play this Chargers offense at this point. I don't think you need to get crazy. Play Herbert and Allen or play Herbert and Williams to differentiate yourself. Hunter Henry's still not a huge part of the Justin Herbert Chargers offense.
I've seen a bunch of people mention this in the comments to the show and in the chat that Mike Davis is 6,700. That's only on the early slate. Mike Davis is still 4K on the main slate. So what likely happened is the DraftKings releases the main slate salaries first, and then they release the early slate and the afternoon stuff later. And by the time that they had already released the main slate, upon releasing the early slate, they changed it because we had gotten that news. That's what I'd say it was.
And you know what? Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you guys are watching this show after it's live, hit us with some comments, questions, you name it, down in the comment section. We see all of them. I always respond to all of them, whether they're nice, mean, or indifferent, or whether they're just questions. Always happy to answer them. And we're going to do something with all the comments throughout the week. Greg Ehrenberg on the Saturday show, the Final Look show, is going to take some of the best questions, comments, turn that into a fun segment, and hit on all of those. So if you have any comments, you have any questions, be sure to get to us if you're watching this after it aired live. Again, I see all of them. I always go back and read all of the comments. What were you going to say, Matt?
I just wanted to say that I actually misspoke when talking about Mike Davis, and I'm fine adding an extra few sentences about Davis just because it's such an important piece of this DFS puzzle this week. The Tampa Bay defense is not just -1 in fantasy points under opponent average. It's -6. It's actually 29th hardest in the league for running backs. So as we're talking about Mike Davis's incredibly low salary on the main slate, that is a point in your favor if you're trying to fade Mike Davis. I'm not sure it's going to be enough for me, but it's enough to say.
No, but yeah, it's an important stat to get out there if it's that big of a difference for sure. Well, we'll see what happens. By the way, guys, if you're playing the showdown slate tonight, Matt Gajeski and I just broke it all down earlier, so you can check that out as well. Even if you wanted to come back to this one, it doesn't matter because this has a longer shelf life. But for the showdown slate coming up tonight, we did a full breakdown on it. Every Monday and Thursday we do that. We also have Alex Brown, former NFL football player, defensive end for a decade almost for the Chicago Bears, joining us every Monday, hopefully on Mondays going forward. We're trying to work that out. That'll be the strategy show as well. All right. What about the Dolphins, Matt? Are you interested in anything here? And did you see enough out of Tua to think that, maybe he's a viable option?
It's not my favorite. I'm looking at the top stack tool. They're outside of the top 12 in value right now. And it does look like Tua's quarterback 14 salary is a little bit prohibitive compared to what you imagine his median projection is going to be. But we do need to talk about game flow. If we're so excited about the Los Angeles Chargers as a passing stack option, what we're really saying is that they're going to score a lot of points. And if the Chargers score a lot of points, that means the Dolphins are going to be forced to try to score a lot of points to stay in this game. And so it's not the worst idea to play Devontae Parker, especially since we know Preston Williams, he moved to IR. We probably see a little bit more target share move his way. We also see Mike Gesicki probably going to get a little bit more usage than we've seen. But I think it's Jakeem Grant with the trading of Isaiah Ford, with Preston Williams going down, as I just mentioned. They need a speedy slot receiver, and that makes a lot of sense as a short area target for a young quarterback. That's where I'm looking. Grant is only 3,000 on the main slate, so it can save you a lot in salary there. And he could easily see 6 or 7 targets in this game.
Yeah, he could. All in all, with the total resting at 48, it's possible that we see some scoring here. I have to point this out because we have seen some history of this over the years that actually many people attributed the Rams' struggles in part to this. And I don't want to go that far, but Chargers traveling West Coast to East Coast. Do you put any stock into that from these LA teams coming all the way to Miami to play?
I really don't. I know that there are some anecdotal stats. Like I think it's Seattle has a lot of trouble moving west to east, but hey, maybe that's a little leak in my planning for the week. So I'll definitely take a look and see if there are some great studies out there that show that
it'd be fun to look into that. Yeah, for sure. The Chargers, just totally inexplicable football team, man. The amount of talent on there and the lack of wins, there's no explanation at all.
True.
But I think it should be a close game. And matter of fact, I'm pretty excited to watch that game. an upstart Miami Dolphins team and a Chargers team that always finds ways to make the fourth quarter interesting. San Francisco and New Orleans, Matt. We got 3 to go here. For all of you guys that stuck with us this long, appreciate you. It's a marathon, but there's no better way to get ready for the week. Subscribe if you haven't done so too. Help us get to that 50K mark, baby. We're almost there. Only, 9,000 to go?
Let's roll.
We'll make it happen. Hit the thumbs up too. So who do we have next? San Francisco and New Orleans. New Orleans 10-point favorites, 48.5 point total. Absolutely beat the shit out of the Tampa Bay Bucks in primetime football last week. Now you've got a San Francisco team who had the shit beaten out of them just a couple days prior to that on Thursday Night Football by the Green Bay Packers. So this should be fun. 10-point double-digit spread going towards the New Orleans Saints at home inside the dome. Woo, we're in for one, Matt. Michael Thomas, healthy. Alvin Kamara. What are we doing with the Saints? We'll start with the home team.
I mean, I think it's not crazy to just say that the Saints are going to spend the rest of this season, maybe even the postseason, just going crazy on teams. They are finally healthy. They finally have Michael Thomas, and they didn't even utilize him all that much because they didn't have to. You know, we saw, if you watch that Monday night game, they were putting their backups in early in the fourth quarter. So you can barely take these usage statistics from last week and use them as part of your projections, because Alvin Kamara actually saw the least amount of usage he had all season, simply because they didn't want to get him hurt. If we're back to any type of close game, which, although we didn't see it last week, the 49ers tend to show up in games. We could see a situation where we just get a ton of points because the Saints are at home, they're at full strength, and they're able to score on a San Francisco defense that is getting healthier, but just is nowhere near what it's going to be this year compared to last year. Now, the places that I really like in this game, when I first look at this matchup, they don't actually pop in the Awesemo projections. I really liked Michael Thomas coming into this week, but his projection's a little bit lower than his wide receiver 5 salary. And actually the same with Emmanuel Sanders. He's projected outside the top 45 wide receivers, and he has a salary of $4,800. Still, I think, like I said, my first thought is that Drew Brees and company, with their full litany of players, finally are going to be able to score points. And I'm seeing an implied total of 30 points. So you're not going to be alone in thinking that happens this week.
Okay. Do you have any preference from like Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, both of them priced towards the top of their position? Alvin Kamara is at the top of the position with Christian McCaffrey out. He's the only player in the 8K range. As a matter of fact, he's the only player Alvin Kamara is $1,100 more expensive than the next closest running back, Aaron Jones, at $7,100. Meanwhile, Michael Thomas, $7,400. He is the 5th highest priced receiver. Same neighborhood, though, as everyone in the 7K range, and not anyone in the top tier not named Devontae Adams. So if you were to comp them to their counterparts at each position, where would you rank them?
Well, that's a great question. So I really do want to say that Alvin Kamara is a different kind of running back than any other running back in the league right now. And what I mean by that, I know I brought this stat up maybe 5 times on the show, is quality opportunities. We love running backs that are primarily getting used in the passing game and at the goal line. And if you look at quality opportunities per game, there is nobody close who's healthy to Alvin Kamara. Nobody close. The only people you have even close to him right now are Ezekiel Elliott and the aforementioned Aaron Jones. So I still think I like Alvin Kamara at the top of his running back pile more so than I like Michael Thomas. But I also want to say that I want to catch the wave of Michael Thomas finally catching 13 passes for 115 yards and a touchdown before it happens, because we're going to see him right up at wide receiver 1, where we saw him all year last year the minute that happens.
Me too. I really want to see it. And it's 7,500, man. God, there's potential there, Matt. There's a lot of potential there. I was thinking, what do you think his average price point was last season?
Oh man, I know we could look this up, but I want to say, way over 8, right? 85, 9.
So last year, it was the last game he played was 9,300, 9,900
I didn't know he got that high. Wow.
In week 17, it was still really expensive. 9,300. He was north of 9,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his last 8 games. So, wow. What I'm saying though is he's $2,000, 2,000 plus, 2,500 less than his highest price point last year.
I love that. And, that's just a great DFS strategy in general. Try to find players that they don't necessarily pop off because of the matchups. And I know that's the focus of this show, but they pop because that they're going to be priced higher eventually. A lot of times this happens with young rookies who start to pop once or twice, but eventually they'll get into that 65, 7,000 range, especially as receivers. This is a great opportunity to do that with a high-end receiver in Thomas this week.
Yeah, I'm very interested in Michael Thomas in tournaments. There's no doubt about it. It's so quick that people have such amnesia when it comes to how good players were before an injury. And this is not a full season ACL tear. He's back.
Right.
And if that's the case, and we expect the same Michael Thomas, there's no reason not to with a young, talented receiver like this. That big game is going to come. And 7,500, 7,400, you could get a monster performance against the San Francisco defense. It's been shredded in the secondary, thanks to injuries, in part to injuries too, but they've been absolutely crushed. So I really like Michael Thomas as a tournament option this week. Right now, ownership is 7%. Yes, please. I will take some. What about the San Francisco 49ers? After this, we got 2 games to go, and then we are taking off.
I mean, it's tough to trust Nick Mullins after that kind of performance on Thursday Night Football. Most of the fantasy output happened in that game for the 49ers with over a 99.9% win probability for the Green Bay Packers. So yes, it was nice to see them put their foot on the gas a little bit for no reason whatsoever other than to help our fantasy teams in a showdown slate. But it's not something that I really want to trust in any sort of large capacity here. I do think they're going to get at least some of their wide receiver core back. I don't think we're going to see Richie James completely dominating the opportunity share as we saw last week. One thing I'll mention, I know I'm jumping back and forth between the passing game and the rushing game, but Tevin Coleman is not going to play this week. They already ruled him and Mostert out this week. So we're going to see another game of Jerick McKinnon, JaMychal Hasty. I guess I like McKinnon better there because if it's going to be a game where we think San Francisco is going to be forced to pass the ball, McKinnon's going to be that passing down back. But yeah, just looking at the projections for Ayuk, he's still inside the wide receiver 25 in salary this week, and his projection's way below that. Same with Deebo Samuel. I'm not sure he's going to play at all. He wasn't participating in Wednesday's practice, so that certainly doesn't look good. And I don't have high hopes for Ross Dwelly or Trent Taylor at this point at all.
Yeah, me neither. But I think you're right in that Jerick McKinnon would be the guy in the passing down situations. We saw that last Thursday against Green Bay. I think Hasty would get worked in quite a bit, as a matter of fact, if it's a neutral or favorable, positive game script. But I don't have any faith in that happening. I had some interest in Hasty last week in a showdown slate, thinking, all right, so many games recently, the script has flipped and it's gone sideways and it's completely unexpected. But Green Bay did what we expected them to do, what most expected them to do, and Hasty got phased out. So I think this could be a similar situation on an 11-game slate. Nonetheless, I'm not trying to get there. I am trying to get to this next game, though, Matt. Seattle and the LA Rams. My God, have the Seattle Seahawks defense, has that been bad? But more than anything, and I tweeted this yesterday, that this is, like, I was shocked when I was going over these numbers. So check this out. The actual total points in Seahawks games this season. You ready for this? Week 1, 63. Week 2, 65. Week 3, 69. Week 4 and 5, 54 and 53 respectively. Week 6 bye. Week 7, 71. Week 8, 64. Week 9, 78. Here's one more for you. Week 1, the total was 49, the over-under. It went over by 14. Week 2, it went over by 20. In week 3, it went over by 12.5. In week 4, it went over by 1. Week 5, it went under by 0.5 point. Week 17, it went over by 16. In week 8, it went over by 9.5. And in week 9, it went over by 22.5.
Okay.
That's crazy.
That is insane. You know what this is telling us too? This is telling us
going under this week.
No, I mean, it's due. It's due for the under. No, I think what it's really telling us is that there's a range of, how can I say this, acceptable over-under totals that we start to get used to as people who look at this week in and week out. And so if you were to put a game total in the high 60s, sorry about the dogs barking in the background there. If you put the game total in the high 60s and see it as a differentiator, it would make people very nervous, and it just wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I think what you're seeing here,
all of the money would come in on the under too.
Exactly.
There's no doubt about it. Even if you said it at 60.
But it's happening is the more important
point. Lot. Did you hear those numbers? It's insane.
And it makes a ton of sense. Look, it's not even close. The Seattle Seahawks are the worst defense against quarterbacks and schedule-adjusted fantasy points by over a point per game. They're the worst defense against wide receivers in schedule-adjusted fantasy points by over 2 points per game. They are bottom 5, again, in that same stat, against wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, and wide receiver 3s. That's based on their DraftKings salary. I cannot express to you enough how simple it is to just play LA Rams receivers and then find somewhere else to be different. Even just looking at this game and saying, I want 1 Seahawks receiver and 2 Rams receivers is just a fantastic way to play this. And I don't even care what quarterback of this game you get, Goff or Wilson, whatever fits. The stats make tons of sense.
The crazy thing about this game is you'd think we'd have to spend a ton of time on it, but we don't, because it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll give you one more. Check this out. The Seahawks defense, right? We already know they're bad. They're on pace to allow the most passing yards in a season by a mile, right? Just go ahead and look. They're on pace to allow like 6,000 passing yards. But on the other side, they lead the league in offensive points per game. They lead the league in offensive touchdowns per game. They're averaging 4.5 offensive touchdowns per game. And while they're number 1 in that category, they are 31st in average field goals per game. Why do I bring that up? Well, they're averaging less than a field goal per game. All of their offensive scoring is coming from touchdowns, Matt, which means that you're looking at a team that's allowing a ton of points, allowing a ton of passing yards, allowing a ton of passing touchdowns, but they lead the league in overall offensive touchdowns and points scored per game. You can't have a better recipe for DFS success than this game. And I don't care what's chalky or what's not here. I will be getting here. But amazingly, Cooper Kupp, like 16%, sure, that's high. It's not absurd at his price point. Robert Woods, 8%. It's not insane at all. This game's going to be popular, but I think given the potential here, I don't really even care.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you just said. I'm sitting here smiling because this is the perfect recipe for fantasy football. It's that simple. This is the game we're playing. We want a bad defense, and on the other side, an incredible offense. It doesn't mean that there's a 100% probability every week that is the way that the game goes down, but that is where we were hoping to get our points. Russell Wilson did have an off game, multiple turnovers and back-breaking turnovers at that, close to the goal line. But again, we have the situation where DK Metcalf still has this incredibly high salary, and we've said this 2 weeks in a row now, simply because the salary is so high compared to other wide receivers. Just using a Wilson Metcalf stack changes the ownership projection of your lineup drastically. Many people are just going to be off of it, playing Tyler Lockett, playing Cooper Kupp, playing Robert Woods. And I also want to mention Josh Reynolds, who over the last 3 weeks is just a few fantasy points per game behind Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I believe it's just 3.5. And he's actually leading the team in air yards over their last 3 games. So that's definitely something to look at. You're going to see super low ownership with him. And the Awesemo projections have him way ahead of his wide receiver 67 salary. So that's a great way to play this as well.
Absolutely. All right. Last one here. Let's make it happen. Before we do, if you guys ever wanted to listen anywhere else and you didn't want to do it on YouTube, maybe you don't have YouTube Premium, so you got to leave the phone open in your pocket. You're listening to the phone, you're listening at work, whatever. You can listen on any podcast platform. We got it available. Awesemo, AWESEMO. Check it out. It's available anywhere. So be sure, if you want to listen in podcast form, we got you covered. I think it's cool to be able to have the whole viewing experience, especially now that I got this gnarly studio background that I set up. Who doesn't want to look at that, right?
It's pretty slick.
Now, what's that?
It's pretty slick. I
Right,
like
dude. Yours is coming along. I like it. You got the shadow box back there, right? You got the trophy.
Little depth, little more memorabilia. We're getting there.
I like it. What's the picture to your right?
This one right here.
Yeah.
That's John Riggins, Super Bowl MVP.
Oh, you got Riggins. Okay.
Yeah.
Making things
A
happen.
little bit of my Washington, D.C. roots there.
And what jersey is that? What Steelers jersey is that?
Little Hines Ward, my girlfriend's from Pittsburgh.
I like it.
Yeah.
Where do you live?
I'm in the New York area, but I'm such a fan of the sport, but I'm without a team because I grew up in Washington. Like I said, you don't really have to say anything more other than that. And when you move to New York, you don't necessarily need to take the heartbreak that is the Giants or Jets. So,
All right, that's fair. You got to find someone, man. Life's more fulfilling that way.
I love my fantasy teams.
Yeah.
I love my lineups.
Not the same. Not the same.
No, you're right. You're right.
I like having that feeling of, people always say, like, with Philly fans, it's what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, it's gonna drive me nuts. I can't think of it. But not they look at it as an improper form of fandom. Like we're just savages and like it's tribal. That's the word I was looking for.
Oh yeah.
Tribal. But in a way, there's something kind of great about that. So I don't know. Try it out.
Oh, in high school, I got yelled at because I was like that. I was neutral with a lot of teams, and they'd be like, "Pick a team, or you're not a real fan." So
Exactly.
I'm used to hearing it.
That's what it comes down to. All right, let's go. One more here: Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. Wrap it up. Kind of a fascinating game. Like we talked about Indy on the strategy show earlier. The only guy to throw for 300 yards on him this year has been Joe Burrow, who has actually thrown for 300 yards in a lot of games this season. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games of 300 plus yards in his rookie season. Many of them have not been accompanied by passing touchdowns, but he has been able to get it done. So I'm not as worried about him in tough matchups. I don't want to play him this week, but I do think this game is kind of interesting. If we go to your divisional theory, though, we've seen a lot of low-scoring AFC North games.
Yeah, exactly. Again, want to just put a little caveat on that. That doesn't mean 100% of the time it underperforms,
of course.
But it just means that we need to take this into consideration. They're teams that are playing each other for the second time. They have tape on each other. They know what to expect. Happens every year, but it's something we need to mention. Look at the Cowboys from last week and how the expectation for the Steelers defense was so much different than what actually occurred on the field on
Tampa
Sunday.
Bay and New York Giants on that primetime football game. We thought the Bucs would bludgeon them, and that didn't happen. That was recent as well.
There's a lot of money to be made when games don't necessarily have a different winner than we expect, but they just go differently than the public expects them to do. And that's exactly the kind of game that the Steelers played last week. Again, my girlfriend from Pittsburgh, her family's always telling me the Steelers love to play down to their opponent. And it is a situation where the Bengals do not have nearly the same record. They have a very, very high implied total compared to Cincinnati this week, which obviously, as a home favorite, we look to James Conner. The same thing, even though he was on the road, we looked to last week.
I got to go back to him, man. He let me down big time last week. I'm going back to the well.
Yeah. But, one thing I was surprised to see is that he's going to have ownership this week. He's got 13% projected ownership. That's not low at all. That's, I believe, 6th on the main slate. But again, I think it just makes a ton of sense against a Cincinnati defense that's been vulnerable in points per play all year long. So, again, we saw a different kind of Pittsburgh offense, as you mentioned earlier in the show, where they just took the running backs off the field for a while and started to switch in their multiple wide receiver sets. I know they like to run with Chase Claypool and some of their other wide receivers, but I don't think that's a week-to-week thing here. So, again, I like both the passing game stack, assuming Ben Roethlisberger plays. I definitely am projecting him in at that point. But I still don't agree with the way that the DraftKings salary is working. The hierarchy has Juju Smith-Schuster first, Chase Claypool second, and Deontay Johnson third. And I think you put Deontay Johnson first if you look at metrics like true weighted opportunity share. So I think that's an inefficiency we can still exploit. Looking at wide receiver 32 in salary for Johnson, Awesemo projections way ahead of that this week.
Okay. Yeah, Deontay Johnson and James Conner, two guys that I like a lot, especially given so ownership. What do we have as far as ownership goes? You mentioned the projections, but do we have Deontay Johnson 2.6% ownership?
I'm fine with that. Now, I'm noticing that right now, the projections include Mason Rudolph as playing. That's, of course, going to change because it sounds like Roethlisberger is trending towards getting cleared. But I don't think anyone needs to tell anyone listening to the show that if Mason Rudolph plays, we're drastically changing our projections and we're probably just staying away from the Steelers. I know that he had a connection with James Washington last year, but that's thin.
Why do I feel like this was Ben Roethlisberger last week? Wow, that's weird. I just did. My brain just completely shot out on me. I guess it was, maybe I'm confusing him with Matthew Stafford, who was in a similar situation. Who the hell?
Well, I will say, I'm certainly happy there's football, and you predicted it right in the beginning of the year that it was sort of come hell or high water with these games at a certain
multi-billion-dollar industry, baby.
You said it, and as an analyst, I'm overwhelmed at the number of people going on and off the COVID list. It's really hard to keep track of.
That is true. That is definitely true, especially given half of them haven't even contracted it. You know?
Right, and they're on Monday and they're back off on Saturday. The one silver lining I'll put in all of it is when there's an information overload, the rest of the public is also overloaded in the same way. So we can get an advantage by getting control of that information. That's what we're trying to do here on these shows.
Great point. Matt, close us out with Cincinnati. Do you have any interest in the passing game, which I think you and I have said it many times. It's crazy. They all have kind of low target shares, but they're all getting a ton of targets. It's just Joe Burrow has been forced to throw the ball an incredible amount. Meanwhile, Mixon was on the side of the field yesterday's practice, spotted rehabbing his foot, according to Paul Dinner of The Athletic. So I that sounds to me like a guy who's not going to play this week.
Yeah, I'm hoping that he plays because the offense is better with Mixon, but I don't think it looks that good. I think it's going to take a while for this midfoot sprain to fully heal. And you know what? The consequence of that is with Gio Bernard on the field more often, they don't really like to run it up the middle with him. So, and the other problem is when you bring Samaje Perine on, the third string running back, the defense, pretty much goes, okay, Perine's on the field. The probability of a run is significantly higher. So by putting Mixon on the field, it actually keeps those defenses on their toes significantly more, which in a way lowers my expectation for the passing game just a little bit. I will mention that the public perception of the Pittsburgh defense is that they have this incredible shutdown secondary. If you look at the schedule adjusted fantasy points, they're actually middle of the road, actually slightly below average in fantasy points, adjusted fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So that means I'm not fully off of players like T. Higgins, who's only 5,500 on the main slate. And I'm not fully off of AJ Green, who's down at 4,400 now. Obviously, these are thinner plays, but AJ Green has been a player we've seen get over 150 air yards and 13 targets in a game. And down at 4,400, we very rarely have that kind of usage upside. Yes, it's the Steelers. Yes, they're not favored, but I'll take some chances in tournament, no doubt.
All right. Matt, it's time to wrap it up. We've gone 11 up, 11 down. Appreciate you guys sticking with us. Go take a nap. As Red Dog said, go get some food. I'm going to go walk the dog. I'm going to get some food and, live life a little bit. Come back here and do it all again. Stick around 2 Eastern. Matt Gajewski and Kyle Dvorak giving you the strategy show, all FanDuel based. FanDuel strategy show. Check out Matt's articles on Awesemo.com. You got the matchups breakdown. You got the data deep dive. And I believe both of them are now free. So that is well worth checking out. Completely free. And one more thing, Augusta at checkout. Use that. Good through tomorrow. Everything on the site. Everything. Half off for an Awesemo Plus Platinum weekly subscription. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow to wrap up the work week on the NFL Strategy Show. But remember, we're not going anywhere. Doing it again on Saturday, and the 4-hour Live Before Lock marathon on Sunday kicks off at 9 a.m. on the East Coast. Stick with us. We're going to win some money this week. Talk to you guys soon.